A black businesswoman finally lands the biggest opportunity of her career, but just moments before her pitch, everything changes. The same white woman who tried to force her out of her seat on a flight now sits across the boardroom table, holding the power to approve or destroy her future. What follows is a quiet, calculated act of sabotage. But what this woman didn't expect was what happened next. Because in just 72 hours, the entire room would be forced to choose a side, and what they chose shocked everyone. Stay with me. This is a story you need to hear. Before we begin, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now let me tell you how an ordinary business trip turned into a battle for truth, dignity, and power. You see, there's a kind of violence that doesn't shout. It doesn't carry a gun or raise its hand. It just assumes. Naomi Ellison had grown used to this kind of violence. The slow, creeping kind that wears pearls and carries tote bags from Whole Foods. The kind that smiles while cutting in line. That speaks of decorum and civility, while demanding your dignity in exchange for its convenience. She was seated in 14C, a place she had claimed not by charity, but by coin. Weeks in advance, she had picked that seat, for the legroom, for the quiet, for the space. A working woman's small reward. Her laptop was open, glowing with a pitch deck she'd rehearsed 100 times. Another presentation on inclusion, on diversity, for an institution that claimed to value both while promoting neither. And then came her. Lydia Crane. 40-something. Blonde. Wearing entitlement the way some folks wear perfume, thick and without apology. "Excuse me," Lydia said, as if Naomi's presence were an error on the part of the universe. "My daughter needs the window seat. You'll need to move. Now, I ask you to sit with this." Not the words, but the assumption beneath them. "You'll need to move. Not would you mind, nor could we switch." No negotiation, no decency, just the assertion that Naomi's comfort, her body, her existence, must yield for a child she had never met and a woman who had already decided she did not matter. Naomi turned. Her voice was soft, but steady. "I'm sorry. This is my seat. I booked it for the legroom. That should have been enough." But racism, especially the kind that has spent centuries learning how to wear a smile, rarely accepts enough. Lydia's eyes swept over Naomi. Her tailored suit. Her box braids. Her skin. Her presence. And something in that gaze, it wasn't rage. Rage would be honest. No, it was something quieter, more practiced. That cold evaluation of a black body in a space someone else believes you should not occupy. "My daughter has anxiety," Lydia whispered, loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "She needs the window. Surely you understand." Naomi did understand. Oh, she understood plenty. She understood how anxiety could be weaponized. How the soft language of concern was often a shield for old, brutal beliefs. She understood how a black woman saying no was never just no, it became defiance, insubordination, sometimes even danger. But most of all, she understood the weight of that seat. The years it took to get to it. She wasn't about to surrender it. Not again. "No," Naomi said, her voice clipped now, the pain held tight beneath the surface. "Your assigned seats are in another row. I won't be moving." Now the air has changed. It always does in these moments. You felt it. The way people lean in with their silence. The way justice never seems to be loud enough, while indignation gets all the airtime. And then Lydia said the words we all know too well. "I need to speak to a flight attendant." Of course she did. Because in her mind, authority still looked like her. And it would come to her rescue, the way it always had before. But Naomi didn't flinch. You see, when you've spent a lifetime being questioned for sitting where you belong, there comes a moment, quiet and seismic, when you decide. Not today. Not this seat. Not this silence. Not this time. The thing about racism in America is that it rarely calls itself by name. It arrives wearing a uniform, a clipboard, or, in this case, a name tag stitched with Michaela. The flight attendant approached with a practiced smile, the kind the service industry teaches, smooth, pleasant, and dangerously neutral. "Is there a problem here?" she asked. Before Naomi could open her mouth, Lydia stepped forward. "Yes," she said, in that tone reserved for waiters and women she thinks beneath her. "This woman refuses to move so my daughter can have the window. She's having anxiety." And with that, the game changed. Because when a white woman in America says she is being denied, when she paints herself as the mother, the protector, and adds an anxious child into the mix, she's not making a request. She's building a case. And Naomi could feel it, how quickly the room, the air, the weight of perception shifted. She was no longer Naomi Ellison, senior strategist from D.C., working on a multi-million-dollar proposal. She was now the black woman causing trouble on the plane. Michaela glanced at Naomi. "And your name, ma'am?" "Naomi Ellison," she replied, coolly, handing over her boarding pass. "Seat 14C. I booked it weeks ago." A beat passed. Michaela checked her tablet. Tapped. Blinked. And for a moment, there it was. Truth. "Ms. Ellison is correctly seated," she said. "Ms. Crane, your seats are in row 22. A and B." You'd think that would be the end of it. But whiteness, when unaccustomed to being denied, doesn't go quietly. Lydia bristled. "But those seats don't recline. My daughter needs the window. Surely this woman can move for a child." That word again. This woman. Not Miss Ellison. Not the passenger. Not even she. No, Lydia needed everyone to remember that the problem wasn't just seating, it was who sat there. Naomi remained still. She had learned long ago that black composure in public was a kind of performance, equal parts armor and restraint. Because to get angry would be to confirm every unspoken suspicion in that aisle. But inside? Inside, she was screaming. Because she knew this wasn't about seats. It never is. It was about how some people still believe the world was made in their image, and anything that challenges that, anybody, must be moved, managed, removed. Michaela, bless her, stood her ground. "I'm afraid Ms. Ellison has every right to remain in her seat," she said. "If you'd like, I can help find another arrangement elsewhere on the plane." And then it happened. That shift. The kind you don't see, but feel. The passengers around them, who had all been pretending not to listen, now leaned in with a different kind of silence. Some are sympathetic. Some are annoyed. But none intervened. You see, people will tell you they marched in the 60s. That they remember Birmingham, Selma, the fire hoses. But when injustice knocks on row 14, they sink behind their magazines and earbuds. Only one man, an older gentleman across the aisle, met Naomi's eyes. He nodded. A small gesture. Quiet, but profound. Because sometimes, even a nod carries the weight of "I see you." Lydia, meanwhile, was spiraling. "I can't believe this," she spat. "We'll remember this experience next time we book a flight." But Naomi said nothing. Not because she was silent, but because dignity does not explain itself to tantrums. And in that moment, underneath fluorescent airplane lights and the buzz of overhead compartments, Naomi felt something rare, not vindication, but validation. For once, someone in uniform hadn't folded under pressure. Hadn't defaulted to the comfort of whiteness. But she also knew, this wasn't over. Not with a woman like Lydia. Not in a country like this. Racism, she had learned, doesn't retreat. It regroups. And Naomi could feel it like distant thunder. There would be consequences. There always are. But for now, she opened her laptop. Her hands trembled just slightly. Her face is calm. Her voice went quiet again. Because sometimes, the most radical thing a black woman can do is simply to stay seated. Gifts from confrontation to collision? You can survive the insult. You can even survive the stare. But what wounds deepest, what has always wounded deepest, is the lie that follows you. Not to your face, but behind your back. Naomi Ellison was adjusting her tray table when the flight attendant returned. Her smile was gone now. What replaced it was that clipped tone, the one black folks have known since the days of "yes, ma'am," and "no, sir." polite, professional, and ice-cold. "Miss Ellison," the attendant said, "we received a formal complaint." Naomi didn't flinch. Because she had been here before. Not on a plane. Not exactly. But in boardrooms. In classrooms. In elevators and coat check lines. Complaint about what? She claimed you were hostile. That you used inappropriate language. Naomi put down her coffee. Slowly. "I see," she said, though what she wanted to say was unprintable. "Let me say this plainly. There is a uniquely American cruelty in how swiftly a Black woman can be recast, from dignified to dangerous, from composed to threatening, without changing a single word, gesture, or breath. Because the accusation is never about what was. It's about what they fear could be. Or worse, what they hope others will believe." Naomi took a breath, one of those deep, ancestral ones that doesn't just fill your lungs, but draws from the memory of every grandmother who told her to keep your head high, baby, even when they try to drag it down. The flight attendant, to her credit, lowered her voice now. "For what it's worth," she said, "I told the senior attendant that the accusation was false. I witnessed everything. I know she's lying." That meant something. And it didn't. Because in America, truth is not always stronger than suggestion. Lies, especially the kind spoken by white women with soft voices, tend to float further than facts. They cling to reputation like pollen to a black coat. "I appreciate you saying that," Naomi replied. But even as the words left her mouth, she could feel it, the weight of being marked. And let us not be naive here. Because it is not just the accusation that injures. It is the way the world is trained to believe it. Without proof. Without pause. Without principle. Across the aisle, Julian, yes, the Black man who had offered her a kind word earlier, leaned in. "You okay?" "No." But what she said was, "Yeah. Just tired." Because that's what we say. We say tired when we mean wounded. We say tired when we mean betrayed. We say tired when we mean this world will not let me rest. The hum of the engines filled the silence between them. A mechanical lullaby for a woman being slowly erased, one insinuation at a time. Julian nodded, eyes soft. "I know that feeling." Of course he did. Because this country does not wait for your mistakes to judge you. It manufactures them when needed. It's the oldest trick in the book. Take the Black woman who dares to assert herself. Refuse to confront her directly. Then whisper into the ear of authority that she is angry, rude, aggressive, all those polite little words that let you call her the N-word without ever saying it out loud. And in that moment, Naomi understood. She had not just won a battle for a seat. She had entered a war for her name. It is written for the older American listener, the ones who know how the face of injustice can smile, and how the mask of friendship can still carry the ghost of power. By the time the plane leveled off, Naomi Ellison was still seated upright, but no longer in comfort. You see, it isn't the accusation that lingers, it's the echo. It gets into your bones, like the chill of a northern wind that seeps through your coat, then your skin, then your soul. And yet, the sky kept rising. 30,000 feet in the air, and somehow she still felt lowered. She had not cried, not flinched, not raising her voice. And yet, she had still become the problem. Because in America, a Black woman who does not yield becomes the story, even when she's done nothing at all. Then came Julian Reed again, sitting in the middle seat beside her. A kind face. Steady. Black. The kind of man who knows when to speak and when silence does more. "I couldn't help but notice," he said, "how you handled that." Naomi gave a polite nod, the corporate kind. Not cold, not warm, just safe. The kind she'd used in hundreds of meetings, thousands of times. "Thanks," she said. He smiled. "Not your first rodeo, I guess." "No," she replied. "And probably not the last." There was a pause. A sip of coffee. A subtle exhale. Then came the surprise, the one racism never expects. Connection. "What are you working on?" Julian asked, nodding toward her laptop. "A diversity and inclusion strategy," Naomi said, with a wry smile that didn't reach her eyes. "For a financial services firm." He blinked. Then I chuckled. Well, that's poetic. It's something, she replied. Half the time I wonder if they want change or just a better PR campaign. Julian leaned in, gently, not with urgency, but with understanding. You know, he said, I'm in HR, Telstra Financial. We just launched a similar initiative last quarter. Naomi's eyes narrowed, curious now, cautious. Really? Yeah. Didn't go the way we expected. Leadership said all the right things. But they still looked at me like I was proposing socialism when I said we should stop hiring from the same 3 Ivy Leagues. She laughed, soft and surprised. A human sound. A rare one lately. They began to talk. Not the way strangers talk, but the way veterans of invisible wars talk. About retention. About boardroom microaggressions. About the coded language of not a cultural fit. About being the only Black face in a leadership room and still being asked to explain to all Black people when a race-related incident happens in the news. They traded stories like old blues records. Naomi spoke of a manager who once told her she was surprisingly articulate. Julian replied with a story of a VP who said, "You're not like other Black men." Each tale landed like a sigh. Because every Black professional knows the song. What they didn't expect, perhaps, was to be singing it in harmony at 36,000 feet. And just as Naomi began to relax, just as she began to think perhaps not all proximity is dangerous, Michaela, the attendant, returned again. "Miss Ellison," she said, softer this time. "I wanted to let you know that the woman from earlier has made a formal complaint." Naomi set her coffee down. "About me?" Michaela nodded. "She claims you were hostile. That you used inappropriate language." Julian tensed beside her. But Michaela added quickly, "I've told my supervisor I witnessed the whole exchange. And her claims aren't true." Naomi gave the smallest of nods. "Thank you." And yet, beneath the gratitude, something else stirred. Because Naomi knew the truth wasn't always the winning argument. That in America, the first story often becomes the only story. Michaela hesitated, then added something else. "This happens more than you might think. Some passengers believe if they complain about certain people, well, they'll get what they want." That word again. Certain. Julian looked at Naomi. She looked at him. And at that moment, neither one had to say a word. They understood. Because every Black traveler, every Black professional, every Black soul navigating white-dominated spaces knows this. Your presence is never neutral. You are always being weighed, watched, measured against an unspoken scale. And when they don't like what they see, they change the story and hope someone will believe it. The thing about racism, when it's not chasing you through streets or calling you out your name, is that it waits. It puts on a suit, learns the right tone, and walks right into the room with a handshake. Naomi Ellison had stepped into many such rooms. Polished glass, leather chairs, ceilings so high you couldn't tell if you were in a bank or a cathedral. Corporate America's temples of profit and performance. But this morning, as she entered the 47th floor of Davenport Financial, something was different. Her shoes clicked on marble, her portfolio tucked beneath her arm. Her pitch was ready. Her hair laid smooth. Her nerves coiled tight like wire. And still, she carried the memory of a plane. A woman. A false accusation. She had not expected that memory to greet her again. Not like this. Not in a navy suit. Not with a title. "Miss Ellison," the receptionist said, "you'll be presenting in the Beacon Room." The Beacon Room. Lord, even the names tried to sound holy. She entered. And there she was. Lydia Crane. No toddler. No tantrum. Just power now, buttoned and composed. Head of Talent Acquisition. The same woman who had tried to displace her at 14C now had a voice in whether she would win this contract. Now, tell me, what does a Black woman do with that? What does she do when the very person who tried to remove her now gets to review her? Naomi froze for half a breath, then moved forward. She shook Lydia's hand. Not out of kindness, but discipline. Because when you're Black in corporate America, your smile isn't always joy. It's strategy. The introductions passed. Naomi noted each name like steps in a minefield. Richard Davenport, CEO. Elizabeth Wells, COO. James Harrington, VP of HR. And then, at the end, Lydia. Karen on the flight. Now, Ms. Crane. Small world, they said. Naomi forced a polite smile. Indeed. And so it began. She launched into her presentation with the steadiness of someone who had no room for error. Slides on inclusion, data on retention, charts proving what Black folks already knew. You can't hire diversity without changing the culture that keeps pushing it out. The room nodded. They were listening. All but one. Lydia sat still, silent, taking notes like a woman writing your eulogy. Naomi pressed on. She spoke of equity, not as charity, but as strategy. She outlined systems, mentorship frameworks, metrics of accountability. She wasn't asking for their approval. She was offering them transformation. And then, finally, Lydia spoke. This all sounds very ambitious, she said. The word ambitious carried weight. The way white folks use it when they really mean too much. We already have diversity initiatives, Lydia continued. What makes yours worth the additional investment? Naomi met her gaze. It would have been easy to fold then. To shrink. To forget the airplane. The lie. The smirk. But she didn't. Instead, she let the silence stretch, just long enough to remind everyone what they were really witnessing. Then she answered. The difference, Naomi said, is that my approach isn't a program. It's a culture shift. One that ties recruitment to retention, mentorship to mobility, inclusion to innovation. It's not about optics. It's about the outcome. She clicked to the next slide, hard numbers from past clients. 27% increase in retention. 35% rise in innovation metrics. The room leaned in. But Lydia remained unmoved. Of course she did. Because what Naomi was offering wasn't just a strategy, it was a mirror. And some people will set fire to the house before they admit they're standing in smoke. As the meeting wrapped, Richard Davenport shook her hand. We'll be in touch, he said. The others smiled, nodded, professional, curious. Lydia stayed behind. As Naomi packed her materials, she approached again, alone this time. Quite a coincidence, she said, her voice like velvet laced with razor. Naomi looked up. Not really. Business flights. Business cities. The odds aren't that long. Lydia's smile twitched. You gave a strong presentation. Very polished. There it was. Polished. The compliment that isn't. That sly dig, suggesting your excellence is all surface. All shows. Naomi didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because here's what Baldwin knew and Naomi now embodied. When you've survived erasure, you no longer need permission to be seen. The thing about power is, it doesn't always shout. Sometimes it wears cufflinks, sips champagne, and pretends it doesn't know your name. Naomi Ellison stood at the edge of the grand ballroom like a woman watching a world she helped build, but was never invited to own. The Davenport Financial Gala was everything old money liked to call elegant. String quartet, floor-length gowns, wine with names nobody could pronounce. The kind of place where inclusion was printed in brochures but rarely practiced at the bar. She had been invited. Not as decoration. Not as a token. But because her pitch had landed. She had come to prove that merit could live where privilege once reigned. But even as she stepped through the golden doors of the Chicago Cultural Center, she could feel it in the air, the difference between being welcomed and being watched. Julian Reed was by her side, suit crisp, presence steady. He had come as her guest, but also as a witness. Because every Black professional knows. The gala isn't just a party. It's a test. They wandered through the marble and chandeliers, smiling, nodding, performing. Naomi met board members with names like Prescott and Whitmore. Men who spoke of diversity, the way tourists speak of ethnic food, with interest, but no intention of staying long. And then, across the room, she saw her. Lydia Crane. Now dressed in red silk, hair pinned high, directing staff with the poise of a woman who knew how to orchestrate everything except truth. She didn't approach immediately. No, she waited. That's how power moves when it feels challenged. It lets you roam, lets you talk, and then finds the perfect moment to remind you. Until then, Naomi held her own. She shared drinks with executives, exchanged ideas with donors. She even received praise from Julian Washington, a board member who said, "It's about time we stopped playing musical chairs with privilege." That gave her hope. Just a flicker, but hope nonetheless. Then, as dessert was cleared and speeches began, Lydia arrived, smiling like a fox beneath moonlight. "I trust you're enjoying the evening," she said. Naomi turned. "It's a beautiful event." Lydia nodded. "The education initiative is close to my heart. Real change starts early, not with adult consultants trying to retrofit solutions." There it was. The cut beneath the compliment. The weapon hidden in concern. Naomi smiled. Not because it was funny, but because she'd expected worse. Sustainable change, Naomi said, requires both early investment and structural transformation. "I believe we can do both." Lydia's eyes narrowed, just for a second. Then it softened again. "And your colleague?" she asked, glancing at Julian with that calibrated curiosity. "He seems to be enjoying himself." It was the kind of question that asked nothing on the surface, but everything underneath. The kind that Black folks have been fielding for generations. Naomi replied, smooth as jazz, "Julian's more than capable of enjoying himself anywhere." Lydia's smile thinned. "Well, enjoy the rest of the evening." And just like that, she was gone, back to her donors and board members, back to her mirrors and masks. Julian leaned in. "She's not done," he said. "No," Naomi replied. "But neither am I. You see, the lie they tell is that once you get in the room, the war is over. But the truth Baldwin always told, is this. Getting in is just the beginning. You must still survive the glances, navigate the microcuts, guard your joy, and speak a language that says I belong without asking for permission." Naomi danced once that night. Not for show. Not for them. But to remind herself that even here, even in the lion's den, you can still be whole. And that maybe, just maybe, dignity doesn't whisper. Sometimes it sways. The morning after the gala, Naomi Ellison sat at a cafe table tucked in the corner of a quiet Chicago street. Steam curled up from her coffee like a prayer she wasn't sure would be answered. She had come to meet Elizabeth Wells, the COO of Davenport Financial. A woman with power and, perhaps, principles. But Naomi knew enough not to trust either without proof. Elizabeth arrived with the air of someone who'd never had to rush for anyone. She ordered an espresso. No sugar. "I wanted to speak before things moved forward," she said. Her voice even. Her posture is surgical. She didn't fumble. People like her are trained not to. Naomi listened. Because survival teaches you when to speak and when to collect evidence. "There are some within our leadership who've grown comfortable," Elizabeth said. "They like our current metrics. Our surface-level numbers. They'll resist anything that looks like disruption." Naomi nodded once. "Karen Crane," Elizabeth added, finally naming the specter that had followed Naomi from plain seat to boardroom, "has built her career on incremental improvements. Your proposal threatens that." Personally, Naomi stirred her coffee, though it needed no stirring. Because sometimes movement is the only thing keeping you from exploding. "And yet," she said slowly, "you called this meeting." Elizabeth tilted her head. "Because I think you're right," she said. But right isn't enough in this town. There it was. The confession. Wrapped in civility. Bound by compromise. Naomi had heard this music before. It was the same tune her grandfather heard in Mississippi when they said, "You're not like the others." The same tune her mother heard in medical school when they said, "We're rooting for you," quietly. And now, here it was again. New face. Same song. Naomi leaned forward. "Let me guess," she said. "Karen won't stop the contract. But she'll slow the rollout. Question the data. Delay access. Undermine from within." Elizabeth blinked. "You've done your homework." No. Naomi hadn't done homework. She had lived it. Every Black professional woman in America has. They know what it means to be approved on paper and disregarded in practice. Elizabeth finally dropped her mask, Just a little. I want this to work, she said. But I need to know you're ready for the resistance. You'll have allies. Quiet ones. Naomi's jaw tightened. Quiet allies, she repeated. The kind that never risks their name, but expects you to risk your body. Elizabeth didn't flinch. Because the most dangerous thing about institutional racism is that it believes itself to be polite. I can give you cover, she said. But I can't fight Karen for you. Naomi stood. Not out of anger, but because the weight of this dance had become too heavy for a seated conversation. I don't need you to fight her, she said. I need you to not fold when she starts twisting the truth. Elizabeth rose too. You'll have that, she said. But Naomi wasn't so sure. Because this is what America gives you, over and over. A hand extended, but never a hand that pulls you up. She walked out into the morning light. The wind was sharp against her coat. She wasn't discouraged. She was practiced. Because Black excellence in white spaces isn't about being liked. It's about enduring the consequences of being unignorable. The wind off Lake Michigan was cold that Sunday morning, but Naomi Ellison didn't feel it. She had walked through worse storms. Not the kind that show up on weather maps, but the ones that sweep through boardrooms and press against your breath, whispering, "You don't belong here." But this morning, something had changed. It didn't start with fireworks. It didn't arrive with a standing ovation. It began with an email. Subject line, next steps, D&I implementation. Davenport had approved her full proposal. Not despite the resistance. Not because Lydia Crane finally saw the light. But because Naomi had made herself impossible to ignore. You see, that's the part they never tell you. The win doesn't come when they clap. It comes when they have to choose you, because the room would look dishonest without your voice in it. And, even then, the war continues. She walked into her new office, temporary but sunlit on the 42nd floor. Her name wasn't yet on the door, but her ideas had already begun rewriting the walls. The same men who once spoke to her like a checkbox now scheduled follow-ups. The same departments that once whispered, overreach, now echoed her framework in staff meetings. But Lydia Crane? She was still there. And that is what made this America. Because in this country, your oppressor doesn't always disappear when you succeed. Sometimes, they get moved to the cubicle next door. Sometimes, they become collaborators. Lydia was polite now. Surprisingly so. She showed up to implementation meetings with notepads and pursed lips. She offered questions, never criticisms. But Naomi knew. Every compliment was a test. Every pause before Ms. Ellison was a reminder, I knew you before they did. But Naomi also knew something else now. Karen Crane no longer had the power to define her. Because something had shifted. Not in Lydia. But Naomi herself. She had stopped looking for fairness. She had stopped waiting for an apology. She had stopped shrinking her brilliance to fit the comfort of those who never earned their authority. In a closing meeting, Julian Reed, who had been with her since 14C, leaned over and said, "You changed this place." Naomi smiled. "Not yet," she said. "But I've made it harder for them to stay the same." And that, Baldwin would say, is the fire underneath the American dream. Not that you make it, but that you make them redefine the ground they stand on just to hold you. She looked out over Chicago's skyline, glass and steel catching morning light. And she whispered, not in fear this time, not even in triumph, but in clarity. They don't get to tell my story anymore. Because power is not just being in the room. Power is when the room has to adjust to your presence.